Hello and welcome to my revision video on market failure and externalities. This is going to be quite tight, so I will be going through it quite quickly. Firstly, I'd just like to point out on the definitions, keywords. Keywords are third parties. They come up in negative and positive externality definitions. And the key thing about our social costs and benefits is that it comes up to the firm and the third party, or consumer and the third party. And that's going to be a key thing to be considering as we go through the video. And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and it's the reason why they don't understand externalities. I'll lead you to read the rest of those yourselves. First thing is to make a difference between the internal and the external stakeholders. It's why they're called externalities. So the internal stakeholders in the market is the consumer who's buying the good, who's paying the money to the firm who is producing the good. There is a transaction involved between them. Stakeholders external to the market are, say, taxpayers who have to pay for the health care of people who are made unhealthy by this good. Maybe other firms who are deprived of resources by this. So maybe Coke is using all the water and local farmers don't have any water, for example, or their local fields are being polluted, for example. And it could be other households. Maybe some households, their houses have gone down in value because we just built Heathrow next to, or an airport next to their house. The important thing here is that internal stakeholders, consumers and producers, do not care about things that are happening to anyone else who is not involved in the transaction. And therefore, we need a government possibly to ensure that these impacts are being taken into account. These impacts can be measured through the private and the social costs. The private cost in this kind of yellow, I'll use a visual way of looking at it first. This circle here shows the size of the private costs. The cost to the firm to produce the good. Land, labour, capital, entrepreneurship. The resources it has to buy. The social cost is not the externality. The social cost is that private cost plus the externality. So in a sense, what you're seeing is the private, me drawing this quite badly, the private cost was that, and then the externality is this additional bit on the edge. So we can say then that the social cost is the private cost plus the effect on the third party. Or you can put it in a different way like that. Where we have a negative externality of production, the social cost is greater than the private cost, as we see in that image there. To try to make that simpler, maybe we could put it, use some numbers to show it to you. I've given an example here in the first one. We could look at oil drilled in the sea. It might cost £5 to drill each barrel of oil, say. It doesn't, but let's say that it does. The example of a private cost could be the building of the oil rig, or it could be the oil worker. All those factors of production it has to use. The cost to the third party is £5. Now that third party could be fishermen. They have less fish to catch because now they've all been killed because there's oil being spilt in the ocean. And the social cost per unit, therefore, is not £5. It is the £5 to the firm plus the £5 to the local fisherman, which is £10. That's the important thing. We could look at another one, for example, electricity using nuclear power. I know that the social cost is £20. The cost to the third party is £10. Well, £10 is part of that £20, so the private cost must be the other £10 in the social cost. There's no other way of, there's no other contributing factor to the social cost. The example of the private cost again could be the capital, so it could be the nuclear power station, building it itself. And the example to the third party could be if the power station were to explode, there would be radiation, and that would cause healthcare issues to taxpayers. for example, notice that you do have to get to a particular monetary cost. You can't just say it creates pollution. You need to say what the impact of that pollution is on someone and what the cost of that would be. You can see immediately that's a problem because it's difficult to know what that cost is. When we're drawing our diagrams, we then use the confusing words Mpc and Msc. You may see this as piece slightly differently. I know different teachers use different words for it. The marginal social cost is the cost to society. It is our social tax curve, social supply curve, I should say, to produce one more unit because it's marginal. The marginal private cost is the cost to the firm to produce one more unit of the good. Firms maximise, we assume, they're maximising profits, and they only consider the private cost. They don't care about anyone else. And in contrast, the government tries to maximise social welfare, so it should consider social cost. And that's where we get the issue of the private sector, the firm, producing the wrong amount for society. When we're looking at, it helps to look at an externality diagram broken down with just two curves on it. And we always want to look at that diagram vertically because costs and benefits are on the y-axis. If I want to know what the cost to the firm to supply the first unit of output, well, the Mpc is the supply curve for the firm, and therefore the cost to the firm of the first unit of output, we can go up and then across, sorry my axes aren't particularly good, would be £1. The cost to supply, say, the fifth unit of output, I can go along, I can go up, I can find it here, go across, and I can see that's £5. If there are an additional £2 worth of externality from producing this good, I simply add 2 onto every point on the marginal private cost curve, and that creates my marginal social cost curve. And this is the supply curve, what the society would want us to supply. It's almost as though it's a social cost curve, a social supply curve. So the cost to society for the first unit of output is not 1, it's actually 3. The cost to the fifth unit of output is not 5, it's actually 7, because I've taken into account the third party who is also negatively affected by it, plus any private costs to the firm. That gives us this diagram here, which we've broken down. We've got our social optimum. That's what society would want the industry, the market, to be producing. And we're going to explain why. It's quite interesting. If you notice, from 0 to Q star, every one of these goods has a marginal social benefit which is greater than the marginal social cost. If I look at it vertically, at all points from 0 to Q star, I've got a situation where the black line here, that's the benefit, marginal social benefit, is greater than the marginal social cost. That means this good, for example, cost the benefit society by £20, and it cost society £10 to produce. I've got a 20 minus 10, I've got £10 of benefit there. And that is something called social surplus. And it's the entirety of this whole triangle here. Now, as soon as I go beyond Q star, you notice my green line becomes higher than my black line. I've got goods where the social cost is greater than anything from there to there. The MSB is less than the MSC. The cost is greater than the benefit, and therefore if I produce this good, Q1, society, I have to minus that off from my total nice yellow triangle. And so this is all what we call dead weight welfare loss, DWL for short. And therefore we can say that at any point, if we've got some overproduction of Q1 minus Q star, Q1 is going to be what the free market equilibrium would be, or put it another way, if we had a selfish firm, a self-interested firm who didn't, of course they don't think about the negative externality, they don't think about the third party, and therefore they overproduce the good from society's point of view. They therefore should therefore be maybe taxed, or there should be some sort of intervention to stop that. Okay. Sorry, just taking my time there. Okay, you can evaluate that in lots of ways. You can talk about the magnitude of the externality, how big it is. You might see something from the text and you can quote that. We would always struggle to value the externality, and it's kind of a ridiculous concept. Of course it exists, but we can't possibly accurately estimate it. We may not know. So, for example, if we are we're spilling oil into the ocean, I could count up the number of fish that died, and I could look at the market price of those and add them up and say, look, we've got $1 million worth of fish that we have now fishermen can't fish. But there may be lots of fish which I didn't count. Where are they? They may be at the bottom of the ocean, and I don't know that. I may not know that the oil killed those fish. Maybe it was something else. So there's always a problem with doing it. It's not to say that we shouldn't be adding it up, but when we do, we're probably misunderstanding it. It also gets much more complicated when the good has both positive and negative effects. So, for example, the electric car is a really good one. It generates greenhouse gases when it's built, but then it saves them when it's driven. So you get less greenhouse gases in cities from the exhaust, yet you get lots of them being emitted when they're built. So how do you judge that, and which one outweighs the other? That's a great way of evaluating a negative externality. Positive externalities are simply the other way round. All of this is the same, except we're talking about benefits. And I'll leave you to look through that. It's exactly the same logic. The logic here is the same as well. We could go to do the same thing and add them up. Find that there. Well, if there's £1 there, that's £2. That must also be £1 to add up to the social benefit. Gym membership benefit probably is feeling better, your health, you feel fit. The benefit to the third party might be firms fewer sick days, for example. How I value that is also, we're not too sure. Again, same for fruits and vegetables as well. Marginal social benefit to society. Again, the private benefit to the consumer. Consumers maximise their own utility and they only consider their private benefit. The governments maximise welfare and therefore consider the social benefits. We get the same idea going on here, where the social benefit is higher than the private benefit. There's the positive externality is the vertical distance between them. For this 8th unit, for example, it benefited the individual by £2, but it benefits the society by 4, because this person, they went to the gym, they got healthier, they felt good, but they also had far fewer sick days, and the firm that employs them now makes much more profit, and that's worth £2, for example. That creates your diagram there, and therefore we can say that there is under consumption. Just be careful of the word there, it's not production, under consumption of the good. And you can see that the socially optimal equilibrium society would want this much gym membership, but because we're self-interested, we only demand Q1. This is healthcare, but it's the same idea. And we get a potential welfare gain of all of that. That is what would be gained if we continue to consume more. You notice that the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal social cost all the way up to Q star. We should be consuming all of those goods. Right, I think I am probably almost at the end of where we can get to. There are some extra little details here about the positive and negative externalities of each of those goods. That's one way of doing it. and the example questions are considered